Okay, Bernard, thank you very much for coming back to North Queensland. Matthew Moloney from Brisbane. We're great fanboys of your work, and we're really, really happy to see you here in North Queensland. Fan people, I should say. I don't want to be sexist about this. Obviously, we're in Brisbane. We're an organisation keen to form a new state for North Queensland. I'd be really interested in your take in regards to the viability. My first question would be your take in regards to the viability of a new state.
I think this is the eternal question for Australia and different parts of Australia, the viability of new states. There is provision in our constitution to create new states. There's also provision in the constitution to include New Zealand as a state. So if there is enough people, then theoretically, yes, you could actually put a case up to create a new state. I'm not quite sure of the mechanisms, whether there's a referendum or whatever. That's your job.
Yep.
But the issue is the demography, and I think the demography is actually quite strong, existing now for far north Queensland. And when you look at the numbers, there is 700,000 or thereabouts people living north of the Tropic of Capricorn in Queensland. So 700,000 people, that's bigger than the state of Tasmania. It's twice the size of the Northern Territory. You could argue that it's at least got enough people for a separate territory. The issue is that the more people you have in a state that is well removed from its capital, the greater the case for independence. And the issue for far north Queensland is that Cairns to Brisbane is 1,600 kilometres. And so if you have a population base stretched 1,600 kilometres or more from the point of administration, then you get these independence type thinking. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it. To some extent, this has already happened in Canada with the formation of the state or territory of Nunavut, which is an indigenous state in the Northwest Territories. Yukon is another one. So this has been done before, and the question then is, well, okay, it hasn't happened now with 700,000 people. What's the outlook? Well, Australia has 25 million people today. By the end of the 21st century, it'll be 45, maybe even 50 million people. And the number in north of the Tropic of Capricorn in Queensland by 2050, I think, will be over 1 million, maybe 1.1 million or so. Is it reasonable to ask 1.1 million people to accept being administered by a point that is up to 1,600 kilometres away? And I would say, no, I think it's like the slow drip of a tap. There is a point at which the weight goes like that, and the question is when. And it's certainly not there at the moment. There is not a burning platform for it right now. I know in your group there is, but it's not in the public domain. So I'll put the case that maybe after the 2032 Olympics, because I do think that southeast Queensland will get the 2032 Olympics. Once that's done, then you could say, well, the late 2030s, 2040s would be a time when the numbers have got to a point where they're really quite compelling, and you could then start to build a case to say, look, it's been a great ride, had a terrific time, but now it's time for us to have our own system of government. There is a problem, however. It's not just the demography, it's not just the timing. The issue is the capital, and that is going to be your problem, not the demography. It's should it be Cairns or should it be Townsville? And whilst there is that eternal tussle between those two cities, then that is going to be the great logistical problem, I think, in putting up a proposition. So here is the state north of Tropical Capricorn. First thing people will say is, well, where is the capital? And Townsville will say it should be us, and Cairns will say it should be us. And while that tussle goes on, then the movement, the case, finds it very hard to move forward.
Well, that's basically revisiting the federation question, isn't it, between Sydney and New South Wales, and obviously there the consensus was Canberra. So we're going to be looking like Brisbane for complete clarity. Brisbane has no official policy as to where it should be. We're just an advocacy organisation to get the discussion going. But there are precedents in Australian history where we can get a consensus. And indeed, there's even been some really, really interesting conversations that we've had, because we're doing a lot of forums where we're speaking about this. And there's even been this idea thrown up of a virtual capital.
Oh, right, yes.
So, you know,
yes.
there's all sorts of, technology is really changing.
Or create a far north Queensland capital territory.
Well, you're going to
like Washington DC or the ACT, for example. That's a halfway between Cairns and Townsville.
I must say I hadn't even considered that. What we were thinking, what was raised at some of our meetings, was more along the lines of, okay, you're going to need a building with an administrative centre, but like, why not have people kind of being in Skype and all those sorts of things. But the only respectful disagreement I would make in regards to this, like 2035, that's a considerable distance away, really. We sincerely believe that it could and should happen within 10 years. And I understand that you're coming purely from the demographic and economic point of view, and I just want to clarify this to make sure that I do understand it. What you're saying is basically this is demographically possible. It's also economically possible, so there's nothing to stand in our way there.
Well, demographically possible, absolutely, in the sense that an Australian state is viable, apparently, at 500,000 people. That's Tasmania. And economically possible, well, yes, there are many sovereign states in the world with less than 700,000 or 1 million people.
But we're making enough money.
Well, that's true. So theoretically, that's the case. Whether in fact the residents would be better off as a consequence is another issue. So by the time you have your Air Force and your Navy and all the other bits and pieces that you need to, you're actually wanting just a sovereign state.
A state, sir, not
an independent country.
No, sir.
Right, okay. You're not trying to secede from the Australian Commonwealth.
No, Vernon, no.
Right, okay. Well, in that case, yes, you could say, well, 700,000 people is more than enough to operate a state efficiently in an Australian context.
The only other disagreement I'd make with you is 2035 is a considerable distance away. Like the reason that we've kicked this movement off is because out of the state electorates, I think there's 93 state electorates, 93 or 96 state electorates in Queensland. 73 are within 250 kilometre radius of southeast of Brisbane in the southeast corner. So fundamentally, our argument is that you have a distortion of democracy. Like for us, this is about making sure that the regions and the electorate, the people electing their representatives in the region have a real voice. Now let's just say that all the other elected representatives outside of that 250 kilometre radius decided to join purely over, well, I suppose you'd say geography. They'd go across party lines. They'd go across all those other issues that go in there, and say, well, we're just going to speak for the regions outside of the southeast corner. Well, they'd still really have no voice effectively. So for us, the issue is we kind of know, and we're seeking validation from someone of your standing that. Demographically it's possible, economically it's possible. So I'd like to ask you a question in regards to desirability.
The case I think you need to make is a moral case, and the moral argument is that it is not fair, it's not the Australian way to have a state point of administration that is 1,600 kilometres away from a substantial population base of 3/4 to 1 million people or more. From a political point of view, in terms of electorates, whatever, you're not going to win that argument. And probably from an economic point of view, more money is being made down south just by the number of people. You have to elevate this to a moral argument, a fairness argument, where fair-minded people, no other state, no other part of the Australian continent, no other quantum of the Australian people are being asked to accept a system of administration from a point that is 1,600 kilometres away. The only place you would make would be, say, the Kimberley or Pilbara, and if you look at the number of people that are permanently resident there, it's less than 100,000, whereas far north Queensland is already 700,000. So you don't have the same quantum of people being as far removed from the point of administration. That moral argument, I think, is where you need to make the case.
Of course, you're very famous for the smashed avocado comment, which was basically, the way I understand it, is basically a discussion of culture and how there is distinct cultures. So one of our other arguments is that there is a distinct culture forming in North Queensland, and especially it's very, 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 very different from the, I suppose, Brisbane consensus, I suppose you'd call it. Like, people in Brisbane have much more in common culturally and socio-economically with people in, say, Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, and look, I'd even say overseas, in your major overseas centres, than they do with people from North Queensland. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, I certainly do. I think that Melbourne and Sydney have been and remain Australia's leading global cities. You can see that in migration flows, in aircraft movements and so forth. I think that Brisbane is making a case to join that cosy partnership. So it'd be Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Southeast Queensland, Melbourne, Sydney. Certainly with the imprimatur of the 2032 Olympics, I think that will certainly continue to draw Southeast Queensland into that nexus between those three cities. I do think that there are quite specific regions in Australia. Before filming, we talked about the tie line, or my theory of the tie line in Queensland. There is a point when you go north of Brisbane where it becomes inappropriate to wear a tie. You are bucking the trend, because we're here in Cairns, of course. And I think the Australian tie line stops just north of Noosa. If you turn up at Bundaberg or Mackay or Townsville or even Cairns with a tie, people, it's not offensive, but people just think, why is he wearing a tie? There are these divisions right across Australia. Yeah. There is a division between Melbourne and Sydney called the Barassi line between AFL and League. So yes, you need to convert the tie line into a political movement and moral movement to create your separate state.
Well, I believe the tie line might even perhaps be a very good location for a potential state border. Can you make a comment in regards to viability as to just how far south it was going to be, would potentially be? Now, again, for complete clarity, we don't have any official policy on where it should or shouldn't be. Okay, we're an advocacy organisation who are talking with people to find out where they would want that to happen. It's not for us to impose our views on anyone else. The point of discussion we use is the 24 and a half parallel, which sort of like.
Right, I'm not sure. I don't know my parallels. Okay. I don't know what town that runs through.
Think round about Bundaberg.
Bundaberg, is it? That's south. So that's south of Rockland. Yeah, okay. This is a land grab.
25 is still north of Bundaberg.
Oh, 25. So slightly north of Bundaberg.
So that would be how I would open the bidding at Tin Can Bay, and then I'd slowly retreat back up the coast from there. But look, I think things like that, look, it's an interesting discussion. I mean, I'm quite confident that the Australia of 2100, the end of the century, will have a different state territory configuration and certainly population to what we have at the moment. The question is, at what point between 2020 and 2100, the next 80 years, will these transitions take place? From your point of view, you'd like to see it in the 2020s.
Absolutely.
I think certainly with the Olympics, that is really going to consume Queensland. It's going to be a great sort of almost statewide nationalistic view of the world, and it's probably not going to get a great deal of traction popularly from that point. After the Olympics, almost on the closing ceremony, that's when this sense of national and state pride really bursts forward. We can do anything. We are our own state, and we are our own part.
May I make an observation in regards to that? You look at some of the, there's been protests in other parts of the world trying to stop Olympic bids, and because what's happened is you've had all these resources go into a central sort of location, which is basically why we're here and why we're putting this up, because the resources have been sucked out of the regions and put in a central sort of place. I think potentially that perhaps an Olympic bid might not be the best thing for regional points.
Well, that's true, although I do argue that I think that there will be a spreading of the love, spreading of the investment beyond Southeast Queensland. The bid might come from Southeast Queensland, but it's not unreasonable to expect some events to be held in different cities up the coast to get buy-in, if you like, from the different states. In the same way that the royal family has, the Duke of Edinburgh and the Prince of Wales, and then Sussex. They're drawing in the colonies, aren't they? Yeah, so if you have an Olympics, then you would have the main stadium down there, but you would actually spread the love, spread the infrastructure, spread the focus and the galvanising magic, if you like, to these different centres. So if Far North Queensland was completely cut off from any of those events or funding, then yes, that would actually heighten the case. Well, you had the Olympics and didn't include us. That would be strong for your case, but it would be smart from a political point of view to actually say, we are having the Olympics, this is a statewide event. Yes, they are being focused in South Queensland, but we're going to have different events in different locations. I do make the point at the 2024 Paris Olympics, the new Olympic sport of surfing is not being staged in the chic Atlantic coast town of Biarritz in France, but in Tahiti. Tahiti is 16,000 kilometres from Paris.
French colony.
It's a French colony. So you could have like the mountain bike riding also, and there's any other event in Cairns. Cairns is only 1,600 kilometres. So that's, in my view, that would be the smart political thing to do. And also you would say, look, it's
In so much as smart political and not mutually exclusive concepts.
no, it's a sense that, you know, this is a community, this is everyone's funding it, we need to spread the love. I mean, I don't think you're going to see an event in Longreach.
No.
Without any disrespect to Longreach, but certainly up and down the coast, I would expect to see a series of events sort of spread out. You know, like cards played. This is Cairns and this is Townsville. And you buy in the support, enthusiasm, and galvanising effect of the regions.
Right. Okay. Well, that's pretty much it. That's all I can think of really. We've ticked off on. And just to summarise our interview, as I understand it, so there's no misrepresentations in the future. Demographically, yes, viable. Economically, yes, viable. Politically desirable, yes. The only sort of stumbling block, if you see it as a stumbling block, would be the Olympic Games.
No, in fact, what I'm saying is that demographically the case builds. The case builds over the course of the century where it becomes politically desirable, that a certain quantum of people. So we're not at that point at the moment. There is not people protesting in the street wanting that at the moment. But if there is population growth, continued growth, then demographic growth leads to political pressure, which would lead to a requirement for separate states as provision for in our constitution.
What about the quiet people? Like when we talk about protests in the street, surely wouldn't need to come down to that. Like if there was just a consensus among the people. Like, admittedly, it's not a high as it's our job to change this. It's not as high profile issue as perhaps that we'd like it to be. But I was speaking to a member of another organisation just recently, and I articulated. I said, look, you know, my concern is that if we ran a referendum right now, let's say that we did it from about Gladstone north. If I wanted to stymie our movement, that's what I'd do. I'd go, okay, let's have it right now. And I said, I'm concerned because of the precise thing that you raised that we might lose. And this chap was vehement. He said, absolutely not. He goes, do not underestimate the quiet Australians. Do not underestimate the sort of anger out there, and do not underestimate the idea that people can see that this critical mass of electorates in the southeast corner is effectively sucking resources and power out of the regions.
There is no shortage of people that are disaffected for whatever reason in parts of Australia. The issue is that you need to get a whole state to agree to it. So getting people who are disaffected to register their disaffection is not the issue. It's actually winning the hearts and minds of people who are outside and say, no, I can see that, I can see the logic, I can see the numbers, I can see the moral,
that's
ethical
why
argument.
They want to do it.
Okay. And so it's that moral, ethical argument that needs to be won. Just slowly, steadily, consistently build that argument, and hopefully that will lead to you getting what you're after.
Look, thank you very much for your time, taking time out of your very busy schedule today. It's again splendid to see you here in North Queensland. Do hope that you come back, and just so you know, I'll be asking a couple of follow-up questions in there. Like I know we've covered off, and it's just so we can raise profile.
Terrific. Okay.
Thank you
great. Okay.
very much.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you.